The snow fell silently that Christmas Eve, blanketing the world in white. Inside a small cabin at the edge of the forest, an old man sat alone, staring at the dying embers of his fireplace. His name was Thomas, and he had not spoken to another soul in 3 years. The silence was his companion, the cold his only visitor. He had accepted his fate, or so he thought. But as midnight approached, something impossible happened. Through the frosted window, he saw them. Footprints. Fresh footprints in the snow, leading directly to his front door. His heart seized. No one knew he lived here. No roads led to this forgotten place. The nearest town was 15 miles away, and the storm had made travel impossible. Yet there they were, clear as day, each step deliberate, purposeful, heading straight toward him. Thomas felt his hands tremble as he approached the door. The footprints were not leaving. They were arriving. Someone, or something, had found him. And on this night, of all nights, he would discover that being alone was never the punishment he believed it to be. Thomas had not always been alone. Once, long ago, he had been a father, a husband, a man who laughed and loved and lived with purpose. But life has a way of taking everything when you least expect it. The accident happened on a winter night, much like this one, 17 years ago. His wife Sarah and their daughter Emma were driving home from the Christmas market when a truck lost control on black ice. The collision was instant, fatal. Thomas survived because he had stayed home that night, nursing a cold that felt insignificant then, but saved his life in the cruelest way possible. The guilt consumed him slowly, like frost creeping across glass. He blamed himself for not being there, for not driving them, for not dying with them. The world continued around him, but Thomas had stopped. He went through the motions for years, working his job at the lumber mill, attending their graves every Sunday, but inside, he was hollow. Then, 3 years ago, he simply walked away. He left his house, his job, his entire life, and moved to this cabin deep in the wilderness. He wanted to disappear, and he succeeded. The footprints stopped at his door. Thomas stood frozen, his breath clouding the air. The wind howled outside, but beneath it, he heard something else. A soft sound, a whimper. Not human, but not quite animal either. His rational mind screamed at him to stay inside, to lock the door and wait for morning. But something deeper, something he had buried for years, stirred within him. Curiosity, or perhaps hope. He opened the door slowly. The cold rushed in like a living thing, biting at his face. The porch was empty, but there at the bottom of the steps, partially hidden by the snow-covered railing, was a dog. A small, shivering golden retriever puppy, no more than a few months old. Its fur was matted with ice and snow, its eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The puppy looked up at Thomas and whimpered again, too weak to move. Thomas stood there staring. How did this animal get here? Where did it come from? The footprints led back into the forest, but they were already being covered by fresh snow. No collar, no markings, just a terrified creature, alone in the cold on Christmas Eve. For a moment, Thomas considered closing the door. This was not his problem. He had chosen isolation. He had chosen to feel nothing. But as he looked into those eyes, something cracked inside him. He saw Emma. He saw the way she used to beg for a puppy every Christmas, the way her eyes lit up whenever they passed a pet store. He bent down and scooped the puppy into his arms. It was so cold, its tiny body trembling violently. Thomas brought it inside, closing the door against the storm. He wrapped the puppy in an old blanket and placed it near the fireplace, adding more wood until the flames roared back to life. The puppy stopped shivering gradually, its breathing steadying. Thomas found some leftover chicken and shredded it, watching as the hungry animal devoured every piece. As the hours passed, Thomas sat on the floor beside the puppy, his hand absently stroking its warming fur. He had not touched another living thing in 3 years. The sensation was overwhelming. The puppy fell asleep, its small body rising and falling with each breath, trusting this stranger completely. Thomas felt tears streak down his face for the first time since he had buried his family. He had forgotten what it felt like to be needed. Christmas morning arrived with blinding sunshine reflecting off fresh snow. Thomas woke to find the puppy licking his face, its tail wagging with innocent joy. He laughed. The sound startled him. It had been so long since he had heard his own laughter that it sounded foreign, like a voice from another lifetime. He named the puppy Hope, though he did not understand why. It simply felt right. The days that followed transformed Thomas in ways he could not have predicted. Hope needed him. She needed food, warmth, training, attention, love. And in giving these things, Thomas found himself caring about his own survival again. He fixed the broken window he had ignored for months. He stocked more firewood. He made trips to the distant town for supplies, no longer content to let himself fade away. Hope followed him everywhere, her presence a constant reminder that life, somehow, continued. But the mystery of the footprints haunted him. On Christmas night, he had been too shocked to think clearly, but now, in the cold light of day, the questions multiplied. He followed the tracks backward as far as he could before the snow had covered them completely. They led deep into the forest, toward nothing. No houses, no roads, no shelters, just wilderness. How had such a young puppy traveled so far in a blizzard? And why had it come straight to his door? Weeks turned into months. Winter gave way to spring, and Thomas found himself talking to Hope constantly, sharing thoughts and memories he had locked away. He told her about Sarah, about Emma, about the life he had abandoned. Hope listened, her head tilted, her eyes understanding in that way only animals can manage. Thomas began to realize that his isolation had not been about geography. It had been about fear. Fear of feeling, fear of losing again, fear of allowing himself to hope. One April morning, Thomas made a decision. He would return to civilization, not to his old life, but to something new. He would volunteer at the animal shelter in town, the one he had visited to buy Hope's supplies. The woman who ran it, Margaret, had mentioned they were always short-handed. Thomas started going twice a week, then 4 times, then every day. He worked with abandoned dogs, abused animals, creatures that had been thrown away by people who should have cared for them. He understood their pain, he understood their fear, and slowly, he taught them to trust again, just as Hope had taught him. Margaret noticed the change in Thomas. She saw the way he moved, the way he smiled at the animals, the way he had returned from wherever dark place he had been. One evening, as they closed up the shelter, she asked him about his past. Thomas found himself telling her everything. The accident, the guilt, the isolation, the mysterious Christmas Eve when a puppy appeared from nowhere and saved his life. Margaret listened without judging. And when he finished, she said something that changed everything. "There was a family who used to live about 20 miles from your cabin," she said quietly. "They bred golden retrievers, beautiful dogs, but they lost their farm last year and had to give up the breeding business. Most of the dogs were adopted, but a few were released into the wild by someone. We never found out who. I wonder if your Hope was one of them." Thomas felt the pieces click into place. Hope had not been sent by destiny or divine intervention. She had been abandoned just like him. She had wandered through that Christmas blizzard, lost and terrified, until she found a light in the darkness. His light, and in saving her, she had saved him. The symmetry was almost too perfect to believe. But it did not matter how Hope had arrived. What mattered was that she had. On the loneliest night of his life, when Thomas had been contemplating whether he wanted to see another morning, a small creature in desperate need had appeared and given him a reason to continue, not through words or wisdom, but through simple, undeniable need. She had needed him to live, and so he did. The story of Thomas and Hope spread through the small town like wildfire. People who had lost loved ones, who struggled with depression and isolation, who felt the weight of the world crushing them, began to reach out. Thomas became an unlikely counselor, not through expertise, but through lived experience. He spoke at community centers and churches about his journey from despair to purpose. He never claimed to have all the answers, but he offered something more valuable. Proof that it was possible to return from the edge. The animal shelter expanded under Thomas and Margaret's leadership. They created a program specifically for people suffering from grief and mental health struggles, pairing them with rescued animals that needed patient, understanding homes. The results were remarkable. Study afts. Our study has shown that human-animal bonds can significantly reduce symptoms of depression, anxiety, and post-traumatic stress. But Thomas did not need studies. He had lived it. 5 years after that Christmas Eve, Thomas stood at Sarah and Emma's graves with hope by his side. It was the first time he had visited in years, and this time he did not come to apologize or wallow in guilt. He came to tell them about his life, about the dozens of people he had helped, about the hundreds of animals he had saved, about the way a single moment of compassion, extended on the coldest night of his life, had created ripples that spread farther than he could have imagined. The long-term impact of trauma is complex and deeply personal. For Thomas, isolation seemed like the solution, a way to avoid further pain by avoiding all feeling. But pain is not the opposite of love. Indifference is. By opening his door to hope, Thomas opened his heart to the possibility of caring again, and in doing so, he rediscovered his humanity. The footprints that appeared on Christmas Eve were not miraculous, but what Thomas chose to do in response to them was, today, Thomas runs a sanctuary for both animals and people, a place where the broken can heal together. Hope, now an old dog with a graying muzzle, still follows him everywhere, a living reminder of the night everything changed. Thomas often thinks about what would have happened if he had not opened that door, if fear had won, if he had chosen to remain alone. The thought chills him more than any winter storm ever could. Because the truth he learned, the truth he shares with everyone who will listen, is this: we are never as alone as we believe. Even in our darkest moments, even when we have convinced ourselves that no one cares and nothing matters, life has a way of sending us exactly what we need. Sometimes it arrives as footprints in the seats. Now, sometimes as a frightened puppy, sometimes as a stranger's kindness, but it always arrives. We just have to be brave enough to open the door.